Game developers are always searching for new ways to make games better, smoother mechanics, bigger worlds, and smarter AI. And while horror developers are also tasked with this, they have an extra objective. How do we scare our players shitless? Of course, the classic answer is scarier monsters, explicit gore, and creative jump scares. And while those tools still work, some developers turned their focus elsewhere. They stopped frightening players and started torturing them. Instead of making fear louder, they made it slower. Building systems that destroy, a hunger bar that won't stop ticking down, a thirst meter that pushes you toward desperation, an exhaustion gauge that drains faster than you can afford it to. Developers realized that incorporating real-world aspects into their games makes it infinitely more relatable than any creature that they could conjure, because, life do be scary. And in doing so, they successfully created emotional hellscapes. They made sure that the scariest thing in the game wasn't dying, it was instead surviving. As far back as the 90s, horror developers began experimenting with systems that wear you down. In Clock Tower and Haunting Ground, you play a teenage girl with no way to fight back. A hidden panic meter tracks her emotional state. The more scared she gets, the less she listens to you. She stumbles, freezes, and ultimately stops being reliable because terror has taken hold. By the way, if you didn't know, a bit of interesting trivia, Haunting Ground is a spiritual spin-off to Clock Tower. It is considered the spiritual successor to it. In this panic mode, for example, the player's character will begin sprinting and occasionally trip, and it's your job as the player to guide them away from the stalker. In games like Resident Evil, for example, your inventory becomes your real enemy. Healing items are limited, ammo is scarce, and save points are rationed. The game didn't use a visible exhaustion meter, instead you felt it every time you hesitated to use your last green herb. Got an awesome shotgun? Well, tough shit, you have to throw out half your inventory to make room for it or leave it behind. But maybe you need the shotgun later. It's these kind of choices that I'm talking about. By the early 2000s, horror had turned inward. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem gave us all a visible sanity gauge. But instead of it just affecting stats, it broke the fourth wall. Pretending to mute your TV, delete your save, or crash the game entirely, the fear you felt on your character's behalf cleverly morphed into fear for yourself. In this game, as the player encounters enemies or witnesses disturbing events, the sanity meter decreases, leading to visual and auditory hallucinations, environmental distortions, and even fourth wall breaking events that affect the player themselves. In Fatal Frame, the camera was your weapon, but to use it, you had to let ghosts get dangerously close. Risk and fear became one. Add limited film to that, and the act of looking itself became an act of endurance. Even Silent Hill 2 understood that depletion didn't have to be visible. It had no hunger meter, no sanity gauge, but every hallway, every groan of static, every clumsy footstep slowly wore you down. James was fighting monsters while walking deeper into grief, and the game made you carry that with him. These early horror games planted the seed. They understood that fear isn't always sharp or sudden. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it ticks down in the background, and sometimes it's hidden inside a system designed to make you suffer. Over time, those seeds would grow into a plethora of visible meters, into choices that don't feel like choices anymore. In most horror games, fear usually comes from the environment, story, and anticipation of a threat. But gauge-driven horror flips this on its head. The threat isn't coming, it's already happening. Games like Darkwood, Pathologic, and Don't Starve shift the terror away from monsters into mechanics. In Darkwood, the real danger is what's happening inside you, not the woods. Don't get me wrong, the woods are also scary, but it's more about the myriad of status effects, good or bad, that you can gain. Your tools degrade, your shelter is never safe. Each night you brace for an attack that you might not survive. And each morning you drag yourself out to do it all again. In Pathologic, you're pulled into a dozen directions by overlapping meters, health, hunger, exhaustion, reputation, infection, and every choice helps one meter while worsening the other one. Is your exhaustion meter high? Well, drink some coffee. Oh no, you lost some health. Lemons can also help with exhaustion. Oh no, you're hungrier than you were before. You become sick, so you skip meals to afford medicine. But surprise, surprise, now your hunger meter is nearly depleted, so I guess you'll have to sell your antibiotics to buy eggs. Don't Starve doesn't even try to hide it. The mission is stated explicitly in the title of the game, along with a hunger meter in the top right corner in case you forgot. Additionally, the developers added health and sanity as hurdles in the way of your inevitable death. In these games, survival is constant pressure. The horror once manifested in a monster's scream or a shadow in the hallway now presents itself as the slow decline of numbers you cannot stop watching. They remind you that you are not okay, and you won't be okay. Not until the game is over, and maybe not even then. Most games teach you that progress brings rewards, that if you try hard enough, you'll win. However, games like Darkest Dungeon and This War of Mine twists that idea into something crueler by tying your victories into meters that you can never fully satisfy. They let you win, only to make you kind of regret it. The developers actually built despair into their game design. Winning is meant to feel hollow. Any success you ever feel will always have a touch of grief. In Darkest Dungeon, victory might cost your healer her sanity or your tank his life. You make it through a dungeon, but your party's stress and affliction meters tell another story, one of trauma, addiction, and breakdown. You survived the fight, but not without long-term damage. And just when you thought you couldn't possibly feel more guilty of your companion's fates, the narrator speaks up to remind you it was your decision that caused this.
A fresh irritant to some, a sanguine memory to me.
Victory isn't as clear-cut here as in other games. It's compromised and expensive. In This War of Mine, survival comes with moral decay. You watch meters tick down like hunger, depression, or fatigue, and you make impossible choices just to keep them afloat. You steal from an elderly couple to feed your group. They don't even resist. They just watch as you take the last of what they had. You actually gathered a lot of things. You finally make it back to your base with all your new treasure, just to find out that you've been robbed. So this treasure that you gained is now your lifeline. Instead of just being straight up scared or horrified, this kind of horror pushes you towards just giving up. But of course you don't, because you're a gamer. And then, just when you think you've adapted, you've figured out how to keep your meters somewhat under control, and you've learned not to ruminate over difficult choices too much, that's when the game decides to throw you a bone. A rare moment of relief. A little hope. But it's bait. In Pathologic, you manage to raise your reputation at the expense of your hunger and exhaustion meters that are now in the red. You bought time, not progress. In This War of Mine, you've just finished feeding everyone, only for someone new to show up hungry at your door. The meters never stabilize, they only delay collapse. Hope is the game's sharpest weapon, because once you let yourself believe things might get better, they hit you harder. You are constantly betrayed by the systems, the world, and yourself for daring to care. Now, with everything we've discussed so far, you may think these games are cruel partly because they limit your agency. But the truth is worse. They give you all the power and then make you feel guilty for using it. In Pathologic, you are the doctor, the savior, the one with the choices, and every choice is tracked by a growing number of meters: hunger, exhaustion, infection, reputation. You try to help someone and suddenly your exhaustion meter is critical. You rest and someone else dies. Plans collapse, however, the responsibility is still yours. This causes a psychological phenomenon called analysis paralysis. This is when you are faced with too many difficult options, none of which feel good, and the pressure to choose correctly becomes overwhelming. Instead of empowering you, it paralyzes you. You're stuck trying to figure out which kind of suffering is most tolerable. Moral fatigue also comes into play here, which is the emotional exhaustion that builds up when you are constantly forced to make decisions that test your values. The more you choose between bad and worse, the more drained you feel. At a certain point, you become so drained by the perpetual negative feedback of your choices that you simply stop trying to make the most morally correct choices. You just want to get by. Darkest Dungeon plays a similar trick. You monitor your party's stress, resolve, and afflictions, managing each stat like a spinning plate. But the longer you manage, the more brittle everything becomes. When your healer develops a drinking problem or your warrior has a breakdown, it feels like it's your fault, because every one of those meters reflects a decision you made. Not only are you failing, but you get to see how badly you're failing in real time. You start believing your choices will make a difference. After all, you're the one managing the meters, assigning tasks, making calls. But over time, you realize those decisions were never truly yours to win. The outcomes were designed to hurt, no matter what you chose. The brilliance of these systems isn't how they restrict you, it's how they seduce you with control, and then they drown you in consequences. The systems in these games are definitely challenging, but perhaps more importantly, they are designed to grind you down. Their primary focus isn't your reflexes or your aim, but your endurance, your empathy, and your will to keep trying. This works because they are tapping into something deeply human. At the heart of it is something we touched on in my previous video: learned helplessness. When players are repeatedly punished for trying, they eventually stop trying at all. These systems thrive on that. Even when you technically have a choice, it often feels like there's no right answer. It all just ends up feeling like different flavors of failure. For example, in Darkwood, you board up your windows, set your traps, fight off the monsters, only to wake up and do it all again. Along the way, you gain new statuses, new afflictions, things that just make it harder. You're punished not for failure, but for effort. It eventually becomes very enticing to stop trying. This is reinforced by ego depletion, the idea that self-control is a finite resource. Every time you choose not to steal, not to panic, not to give up, it drains you. These games demand constant restraint, empathy, and improvisation, and then they penalize you for it. Slowly, your willpower wears down. You either harden or you break. For example, in Pathologic, every act of restraint, avoiding confrontation, helping strangers at personal cost, or refusing to exploit others for resources, drains you. The longer you try to hold on to your humanity, the harder it gets. And then there is decision fatigue, a mental burnout that follows too many high-stakes choices in a row. For example, every day in this war of mine brings another impossible decision. Who do we bandage up? Who do we give medicine to? Who do we feed? Your character isn't getting worn down, you are. And by the time you finally make a choice, one that costs you more than it relieves, you realize that you were being led here all along. The game presents difficulty while engineering your collapse behind the scenes. The meters chip away at your emotional reserves, turning you from someone who cares into someone who copes. You start to ration your compassion. This is not what you want to do, but the game has repeatedly told you that caring only leads to pain. Throughout this video and the previous video, I've mentioned a ton of games whose primary goal is to make you suffer as slowly as possible. And then there's Fear and Hunger. that makes you suffer immediately and intensely. There are no real safe zones, no healing fountains, and no friendly NPC offering quests. Well, I mean, there are NPCs offering quests, but there are no ray of sunshines. From the moment that you enter the dungeon, you are bleeding resources, cursed with starving, and you're alone. Every step forward is a risk, with mechanics designed to obliterate you in more ways than one. And I really do mean that literally. You want to rest? Okay, cool. You might get killed in your sleep, but cool. Want to heal that infection? You have no meds, so, just cut off your limb. What? Want to survive this heavy attack coming your way? Cool, your fate is bound to acquaint us. Fear and Hunger is a master at giving you just enough hope to think you might make it. And it's also a master at taking that hope away, again and again and again. And somehow it keeps you crawling back for more. But we'll talk more about that soon. Throughout the years, horror games have presented itself in many forms. Sometimes it lurks in the shadows, sometimes it screams through static, and sometimes it quietly counts down a meter in the corner of your screen. The worst thing a game has ever done to me wasn't a jump scare or a grotesque monster, it was watching a sanity meter fall, hearing a survivor cry, choosing who starves, and realizing no matter how hard I tried, nothing I did would ever be enough. I take a monster in the dark over that any day. Thank you to all the channel members keeping the channel alive and allowing me to do these wacky little videos that I like to do. I appreciate you guys. And while horror developers are also tasked with this, they have an extra objective. How do we scare our players shirtless? Sorry, in my script it autocorrected shitless to shirtless. How do we scare our players shirtless? Fine.